aged, we have a very good and extensive infrastructure which can form the backbone again of a restored economy. With the critical investment that our nation needs, this infrastructure can be restored, updated and improved. The private and public sector must work together in private-public sector partnerships, joint ventures and BOT schemes to our best national interests. As important as large-scale projects are, the ordinary citizens of this nation must not lose sight of smaller grassroots projects that can help individual communities and provide localized benefits and employment. An example of this is the just mentioned emergence of the small-scale commercial tobacco farmers, who are helping hugely in the resurgence of that sector. I must commend our honourable ministers for taking the initiative to welcome dialogue on ways of improving the Zimbabwean and IMF relations. We must continue to dialogue, communicate and positively investigate our best options. It is through open discourse and the free exchange of ideas that we as a nation will be able to plot our future investment and investment partners. Functions such as this are very important. When I look around me, the caliber of the attendees and the attendance here today indicate the true potential of Zimbabwe. We need to have self-belief and realize the potential that we as a people hold. We need to have self-belief and realize the potential that we as a people hold. And we need to ensure that this potential is nurtured and grown, not for our benefit, but for the benefit of our children, grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren. I'm nearly finished. I must congratulate Zimpapers for taking the initiative and organizing this platform for open dialogue. It is only too easy for journalists to take the line that it is their job simply to report the news and not to be part of it. The fact that Zimpapers realize that they play a greater social role is highly commendable. Thank you, Zimpapers, and I think thanks must go, and an acknowledgement must go to the Honourable Minister, Professor Jonathan Moyo, for his part in all of this. Congratulations to Honourable Ministers for demonstrating a desire and willingness to enter into dialogue and to discuss such matters with the private sector in such forums. The economy is neither exclusively a public sector nor a private sector problem, but a problem for the people of Zimbabwe. It is only as the people of Zimbabwe engaging in common purpose that we will grow our economy and overcome our current economic challenges. Whilst we no doubt need to look to foreign investment to boost our economy, I offer the following brief words of warning. We as Zimbabweans must learn to live within our means and not spend money that we have not yet earned. We must control the importation of unnecessary inputs, particularly in respect of foodstuffs and consumables that we should be producing within our own borders. And obviously, we as Zimbabweans must demonstrate our ability to service our loans. As a nation, we must identify, make administratively possible, and then develop all new and viable mines. Zimbabwe's mineral wealth lies relatively untapped, and we need to ensure that we develop these resources in a responsible and viable manner without delay. We must, to echo the words of our President, His Excellency, we must beneficiate as much of our resources as possible. There will no doubt be challenges in doing this, to develop the necessary infrastructure. But the long-term benefits to Zimbabwe for beneficiation are huge. To the IMF, I assure you that as Zimbabweans, we are going to resolve our current indebtedness. We are going to emerge victorious. Finally, I've already said it once, but I would like to say it again. I would like to publicly declare that I am so very proud to be Zimbabwean. I am committed to this nation. I pray for the day when we can all work together for our nation as a single people, regardless of gender, religious persuasion, language, nor race. The day that we are simply all Zimbabweans working for our president, our government, our nation, Zimbabwe, under the single and absolute authority of our good Lord God. Thank you.
Thank you, Godlayo. Mr. Goddard has adopted an ethnic name. In Bulawayo, he is affectionately known as Godlayo. He's very fluent in Ndebele as well. I'm sure he would have done that. Thank you very much. Another round of applause for Mr. Goddard. Our final discussant or respondent is Mr. Mungai, the former World Bank country manager to Zimbabwe. Mr. Mungai, I don't know whether you'd like to speak from there or you would like to come up here. The choice is yours. Thank you.
My colleague said I should come to the front. Well, thank you very much. I would say I agree with everything that's been said before, therefore I should sit down as the last speaker. I have very little else to add. But if I did that, I'm sure I will not be invited again. And I think as a retired man, it's good to be invited again to meet old colleagues and old friends. So I think I need to say something about what was said. Let me first of all start with what the minister said. And I think as a discussant, I think I would take a few things from what the minister said, what Domenico said, and some of my discussant before me said. One, the minister said the IMF is like a doctor. Now, it's interesting. If I said over that corner there's somebody with a very bad cold, all of you would kind of look around and say, we know what cold is. If I then said over that corner there's somebody that's got tuberculosis, I would see a few people moving away looking at each other suspiciously. If I said in that table over there there's somebody with Ebola, I think this room would empty very fast. So, the question really I certainly would like to hear a little bit more, and I think Domenico would consider me an inappropriate old colleague of his cousins, as I used to call them, cousins across the table, is what exactly is the disease Zimbabwe has got, if you are the doctor? Now, the IMF, my understanding is that it uses very similar language and indicators to say the nature of economy you have. And therefore, in a way, when you say a common cold, a headache, we all have a sense what that means. So when the IMF says something about Zimbabwe, the international community factors that on the basis of what they know of other countries. And that is why they are important, in the sense that they do work around many countries, therefore their knowledge about the functions of this economy is important for all of us. In the case of Zimbabwe, as a hard currency economy, we have been assured that interest rates and inflation are not issues that are determined by the minister or the governor, the central bank team, or even the business people. A lot of it is externally determined. Therefore, it's not an issue for the IMF. There is an issue which I think I'd like to hear from the business people, and this is the question of the crowding out of the business sector by the public sector expenditures. That is something I think the minister mentioned, that's something the IMF kind of hinted at, and that's something I think Anthony hinted at. The third one is a question of, what do I might say, is Zimbabwe has an IMF program that has been reviewed twice and passed. So why are we not seeing the kind of domestic and foreign investment inflows that the architects of the reform program had hoped for? And I think, to me, that's a question I hope as business people, and I don't think I'm looking to the minister to answer the question or the IMF to answer the question. I think it's a discussion that I'm hoping that all of you around here should ask yourself, why is that the case? And the discussion this morning, I think in a way didn't touch some of the issues, and I would like to kind of, as a discussant, raise one of them. One of them is that when you talk to most investors, they talk about what they call the country political risk. Now, if political risk is equated with political uncertainty, then Zimbabwe is no more politically uncertain than many of its peers. And yet, investors are actively participating in these similar countries while having minimal impact in Zimbabwe. So the question I think for us this morning is to ask ourselves is, why are the investors not coming here? Which is what the discussion was in terms of the discussion when I was asked to come and be a discussant. Mine was to kind of touch on this question. My understanding from business people, and I would like to hear from you during the discussion, is what we call the business climate. That is not the political risk in the kind of many other countries around the world, it's about the business climate. And here, the question of contracts, and I think Anthony referred to one of them, has been raised. And the predictability of the way the policies are implemented, that is whether is there consistency in the policy implementation. And I think the minister has spoken at this at length in various other forums and breakfast meetings, so I've said nothing about it. There's a question of the property rights regime. Every investor says, I want to know about the nature of my investment. If I make an immovable asset, I make an investment in it, what is it? And the question is, how much, and I think somebody referred to it, I didn't quite note the name, we talked about the completion of the fast-track land reform program. Since that land reform program is over, the question is are the continuing kind of on and off instability sufficient to keep the investors away, or is that part of the business risk that the business people are talking about? And finally, the question of liberalized economy, which Anton raised about, where the question of the business people are saying, give us some price controls, they are saying, don't give us price controls, and the citizens are saying, if I give the business price controls, it means I have to pay more. And therefore, there's the discussion here that needs to take place between the interests of business people, their customers, and the government. And that, to me, in terms of certainly when you said the IMF program elsewhere does, and in this case in Zimbabwe, all they said is we accept and we endorse Zimbabwean strategy of liberalizing the prices and removing price controls. If they start making their way back, are you sliding back, or is that a temporary move? Is that a temporary solution? The final aspect of the IMF program deals with something about bringing equity, which is the idea that the government of Zimbabwe promised the people of Zimbabwe to provide some resources to make sure health, education, water and sanitation, food security, at least they are made available so that the ordinary citizens of Zimbabwe's lives improve. That has been very difficult from my understanding because of the government's employees take such a high proportion of this revenue. Therefore, both business people who complain about being crowded out of the market and the ordinary citizen feeling I'm not getting enough services have a dialogue here with the government. And that's something certainly I'm hoping that as part of this breakfast discussion, we'd like to hear what the business people think are the solutions and some of the things the Zimbabwe society can take trying to kind of resolve these issues. Finally, Anthony talked about the question of, I think it's as Anthony or somebody raised a question about subsidies. I think targeted subsidies for the poor have been shown to work around the world. And the question is, where is Zimbabwe with targeted subsidies? And I'd like to hear from the business people in the discussion, do you feel that your society has sufficiently targeted subsidies that address the needs of the poor in a way that makes sure that you and I, who should not be benefiting from them, are not benefiting from those targets? Anthony talked about domino effect, and this is my last point. Now, in those people who live in countries with snow, they will tell you that it might just take one stone from the top of the hill to roll down to start an avalanche, which can either clean out or create major disasters or create opportunities for the skiers to have places to go and ski. So the question is, what is that stone that will create the avalanche for Zimbabwe's investment, so that we have an investment avalanche, which I assume is what everyone sitting here is hoping for. And I think the stone was starting to emerge, in the form of what I call the bold policy innovations around a number of issues. And I'd like to mention three from the discussion. One is that there's been talk about how do you share revenues, especially over your mines and your natural resources. Secondly, Sept spoke about, concerned about, you have an economy which has a history. And in our discussion, most business people, I've always said to some of them before I became a retired fishing golfer, that the problem we have in Zimbabwe, and it's not just Zimbabwe, in many parts of Africa, is that it's like driving a car with your eyes firmly in the rear view mirror, saying what a wonderful past you had. And you forget that the future is where you drive the car, not what you see in the rear view mirror. Therefore, when the minister spoke several times and talked about a new economy, I kept hoping to hear from you, the business people, what is that new economy going to be? What do you want it to be? How are you going to build it? And I think the Sept's idea of a special economic zone was an attempt to use the examples and lessons from countries like China, India, and others to figure out how you can create a new industrial strategy. Not based on what you necessarily need, what you did well in the past, but what in a highly differentiated global economy Zimbabwe is best at producing. And that, to me, I'm hoping today, at least in this discussion, I'll hear something about that from our questions you ask and the answers you give. In the SMP program, there's also the question of, and the minister referred to the question of mines. And one of the issues is the question of transparency. I just would like to quote one fact my colleague from Zambia reminded me last week, that by holding public auctions in Lusaka, the Zambian government was able to raise its revenue from gemstones, which is, I think, mainly emeralds, from 37 million in 2011 to 232 million in 2012. That is a six-fold increase just by holding a public auction in Lusaka for the gemstones. Imagine if you held a public auction for diamonds and gemstones in Harare.
Amen.
Therefore, my challenge to you, and really not to the minister, mine is a discussion for what they said, is to say, if the continued dialogue and engagement with the IMF and Zimbabwe continues as it goes, and the investors are hoping that it will bring success, how is it, what do you need to do to make sure that that era of sustained economic growth takes place? And I can only say, if we can get bold, innovative, and consistent policy implementation, that could lay the groundwork for such a desired outcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mungai, for that thought-provoking rendition that you have given us. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now proceed to open the discussion to the floor. Several questions have already been asked by the discussants. However, in the interest of open dialogue, we would like to open this discussion to the floor, and we are going to conduct that section as follows. I will take the questions in batches of 4 and then allow our Honorable Minister and the head of the IMF mission, Mr. Fanezzi, to respond to your questions and any other questions that have been asked during the course of the morning. So if you would like to ask a question, as the school teacher today, I will ask you to cast your mind back. You need to put up your hand so that I can point to you, or those that have our assistants that have the microphones can pass a microphone to you so that you can ask a question. All right, I understand there are some people with ready-made questions that they would like to ask, so perhaps